Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our fourth and final World Justice Challenge 2021 Regional Showcase, this time featuring our finalists from Europe, North America, and Central Asia. My name is Ted Picone. I'm the Chief Engagement Officer for the World Justice Project, and I will be your host for today's session. First, I want to start by thanking our sponsors for the World Justice Challenge and our many partners who really all contributed in various ways to making this happen. We are very grateful to them. It could not have happened without their support. And in particular, I'd like to thank the Municipality of The Hague and the Bingham Centre for the Rule of Law for partnering with WJP on today's regional showcase. Let me start by giving you a quick overview of what the World Justice Challenge is this year, and then I will give you an overview of the program for today, and we'll get diving into the substance as quickly as I can get through these opening notes. So the World Justice Challenge 2021, Advancing the Rule of Law in a Time of Crisis, is a global competition to identify, recognize, and promote good, accountable governance practices and high impact policies and projects that protect and advance the rule of law in the face of the ongoing COVID-19 crisis. Now we're over a year into the pandemic, and we've learned some things. We know that adopting good rule of law practices is essential to addressing the crisis's underlying governance challenges and supporting an effective recovery process and building back better and more just societies. The World Justice Challenge aims to support and accelerate the dissemination of high impact, high quality rule of law projects and encourage their uptake by policymakers and donors and other rule of law stakeholders in order to meet that objective. Cash awards will go $20,000 each, will go to 6 projects that show demonstrable results and promising prospects for future progress, for replication, and for scaling. Finalist projects are currently being profiled on the WJP website. There's a map on your screen that shows just how diverse the 30 finalists are. And of course, we're showcasing them in these regional events. And by the way, this event is being recorded and will be available for viewing later on. Our finalist champions are available to discuss their projects and answer your questions on our World Justice Challenge Community Forum. This is WJP's new digital knowledge platform. And if you haven't already joined the community forum, we encourage you to do that. We've put a link in the chat box with instructions on how to join. Following today's final showcase, our panel of experienced judges will deliberate and choose 5 winners. And these 5 winners will be announced live online on WJP's Zoom channel on Wednesday, May 26th. So save the date, and we hope you'll come back and join with us as we celebrate the winners. One of the 5 winners chosen by the judges will receive World Justice Project's first ever Ruth Bader Ginsburg Legacy Prize to be awarded to the finalist project that best exemplifies the fight against inequality and gender-based discrimination. In addition, a 6th winner will be selected by popular vote by WJP's network, chosen for its inspiration and impact. And we encourage all of you on this call to request a ballot by logging on to the community forum link in the chat box. And click on the vote section and you'll get to a form that asks you to request a ballot. And it turns out that voting will open tomorrow. We're giving people a good 2-week period of time to consider their vote, and it'll run from tomorrow and close on Friday, April 30th. This year, the competition has been quite stiff. We've received over 425 submissions from 114 countries. And from these 425, we chose 30 finalists to take part in this round. And these projects revolve around 4 themes of the competition: the impact of COVID-19 on the rule of law in 4 themes: access to justice for all, accountable governance, anti-corruption and open government, and fundamental rights and non-discrimination. So today is the North America, Europe, Central Asia Finalist Showcase, and later in the program, we will hear from the 8 finalists from the region. Very briefly, an overview of today's program. There'll be 3 parts. First, to help set the stage, we will spend about 20-25 minutes hearing from our regional partners and sponsors, the Municipality of The Hague, the Bingham Centre for the Rule of Law, and the law firm of Wilson, Sonsini, Goodrich, and Rosati on how COVID-19 has affected the rule of law in this region. I'm pleased to welcome Saskia Brunes, Deputy Mayor of the Municipality of The Hague, Murray Hunt, Director of the Bingham Centre for the Rule of Law, and Deirdre Carroll, an associate practicing antitrust and competition law with Wilson Sonsini and an active pro bono contributor to WJP's work in Brussels. After our initial discussion with this group, we will hear short 3-minute pitches, presentations from each of the 8 finalists. After the first round of their presentations, I will ask one quick follow-up question for each of them. And then our third phase will go into breakout rooms, and with 1 project in each room. And there, the audience, all of you will be able to ask follow-up questions directly to these project representatives. And each of those will go 10 minutes. We'll have 3 rounds with the breakout rooms. So that's how we're going to proceed. I will now turn to our first panel discussion, the effect of COVID-19 on the rule of law. So let's start with a diagnosis of the problem. We know from WJP's Rule of Law Index and other studies that respect for the rule of law and human rights, values and practices was already deteriorating before the pandemic hit. The trends were not good. We've also witnessed how the pandemic has exacerbated problems in at least these 4 components of the rule of law that I mentioned: access to justice, accountable governance, anti-corruption, and fundamental rights. Murray, let me start with you. What does the Bingham Centre see as the main effects of the pandemic on the rule of law in your part of the world?
Thank you very much indeed, Ted. Very good to see everybody. And thank you very much indeed to the World Justice Project as well for the opportunity to collaborate with you on this important project. It's always a delight to collaborate with you as a partner, and it's a great joy to be here today. So it's very difficult to know where to start, Ted, in response to that question, since the pandemic and the responses to it have had such a huge impact on the rule of law. So I've chosen to just focus on one major impact from the European region in each of your 4 themes. So under access to justice for all, the big challenge really in Europe has been keeping the basic justice infrastructure going, keeping the courts open, keeping access to legal services, just simple continuity. And in some European countries like Romania and Bulgaria, there have been some concerns about the extent of the restrictions which have been imposed on access to court throughout the pandemic. And this has been a problem everywhere. Here in the UK, we also have a huge backlog of criminal trials. Under accountable governance, keeping parliaments open and doing their job of holding governments to account has also really been the big challenge. Parliaments have had to be inventive to do this, leveraging technology to do so. But even where they've done so, as here in the UK, Parliament has still been sidelined to a very large extent. And governments have throughout Europe gotten rather used to extensive delegated lawmaking powers and to not consulting parliaments or giving them an opportunity to vote on hugely restrictive lockdown measures. Fundamental rights and non-discrimination, well, the unequal impact of both the disease itself and the measures to counter it has really lifted the lid on deep-seated structural inequalities in all of our societies. Whether it's the spike in gender-based domestic violence, the disproportionate economic impact on workers in the informal economy, the significantly greater impacts of the disease on Black and minority ethnic communities, the impact on the education of children of poor families on the wrong side of the digital divide, this last year has shown that Europe's formal commitment to equality before the law as a fundamental rule of law value is woefully inadequate to achieve real equality. On your last theme of open government and anti-corruption, well, the pandemic has also exposed the relative weakness in Europe of our safeguards for open and transparent government, especially in relation to public procurement and the distribution of government help. Obviously, in emergencies, governments have to act fast to protect the public, and that means that public money needs to be spent quickly. But even in emergencies, there have to be proper safeguards against abuse. With huge amounts of public money being spent on PPE, vaccines, and schemes to protect employees and businesses, in many countries in Europe, there have been allegations of cronyism in the awarding of contracts and the distribution of assistance. And again, this is a problem everywhere. In fact, in the UK today, the House of Commons is debating whether there should be a parliamentary inquiry into the informal communications between a former UK Prime Minister and the Chancellor, the Finance Minister, about the availability of pandemic-related financial assistance to a particular business. The most worrying, Ted, to go back to your question, the most worrying, I think, of these impacts is the risk of normalising the exceptional. Emergencies obviously place the rule of law under huge strain in many different ways, but they normally pass. This emergency might well be different. We may be living with this for the foreseeable future, and the danger is that we all get used to the compromises that it entails. And this, for me, is most dangerous in relation to accountable governance. The concentration of power in the hands of the executive and the weakening of both parliamentary and judicial control must not become long-term consequences of the pandemic.
Murray, that's really helpful, the way you kind of painted a comprehensive picture across the board on these 4 issues. Thank you for that, and a great way to start the discussion. Let me turn to Saskia Brunes, Deputy Mayor of The Hague. As a senior leader of the capital city of the Netherlands, what can you tell us about the main rule of law problems in your specific municipality?
Yes, thank you, Ted. First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for allowing me to speak here today. And I want to congratulate the finalists, and I wish them all good luck in the presentations on the projects and later on during this session. And I want to emphasize the importance of having this World Justice Challenge, especially during a time of pandemic. The world is facing new challenges and barriers for reaching justice for all by 2030, according to the Sustainable Development Agenda. And identifying good practices to build back better are crucial. And as Alderman for the City of Peace and Justice, The Hague, it is therefore an honor for me to speak here today. And we can say that many cities of the world, maybe all cities of the world, including The Hague, access to justice remains a challenge. People are facing justice issues on a day-to-day basis, affecting their daily lives. And the pandemic has had a definite impact on this as well. The Hague conducts a long-term social impact analysis in which we monitor the effects of the pandemic on our city. In general, it seems that 2 main characteristics stand out. Firstly, COVID-19 seems to be an inequality virus. Across society, it tends to increase inequalities between groups. And secondly, although COVID-19 is a physical threat, in the first place to elderly, it also affects young people mostly in terms of psychological damage. And this effect cannot be underestimated. And these effects occur across all sectors. It influences access to education, to employment, access to health, and also access to justice. As a municipality, and especially, of course, as City of Peace and Justice, we feel a responsibility. We therefore teamed up with the NGO, The Hague Institute for Innovation of Law, to map out the legal problems in The Hague. We made a survey. It was sent out for 5,000 citizens to find out how people deal with legal issues. And Hill conducted several interviews, both with citizens and legal care providers. And the result shows that justice issues have a large impact on the lives of citizens in The Hague, similar like elsewhere in the world. And most common issues are around disputes with neighbors, housing, and followed by crimes and traffic problems. But family issues, housing issues, and also money problems, domestic violence, disputes around work, about housing, they be more common especially more common among the vulnerable people and vulnerable citizens in The Hague. And the results also showed, now we come to COVID, that COVID-19 affects access to justice extra negatively, especially for these vulnerable people. And with person-to-person contact moving to online contact, not everybody who needs help is reached. And the research also showed that personal contact in local community centers play an important part in helping people with access to justice. But when they're closed, this is less possible. And from identifying problems and needs they have to helping with the language barrier in an accessible way, that's important about these local community centers. The social impact analysis supports this finding. So this is something we'll take into account when taking the next step in solving legal issues at the local level, especially in COVID times.
Very good. Thank you, Suska. It's really interesting that you all have partnered with Hill to really get at the core issues from a data perspective. And it's so important that we have good data. That's been one of our focus of our work here at World Justice Project, and look forward to hearing the next steps in a second round of questions. Deirdre, let me turn to you. You've been closely monitoring rule of law developments at the European Union level, as well as in Belgium, of course, where you are, and in your native country of Ireland. What would you say are the most worrisome effects from where you sit of the pandemic on the rule of law?
Thanks, Ted. As always, Wilson Senior, delighted to partner with the World Justice Project on these issues. I'll provide a very high-level overview on the impact of COVID with some examples from member states, as you stated. I mean, in the EU, Cobit has simply just exacerbated the existing rule of law challenges, with many executive branches in EU member states using this crisis as an opportunity to further concentrate power through the use of emergency measures. While at the same time, obviously the impact of Cobit is that the usual checks and balances are undermined as courts, legislatures, and other institutional and citizen checks are hampered in carrying out their constitutional duties and rights. We would need hours to go through all of the specific cases, unfortunately, but Hungary and Poland are gradually dismantling judicial independence and fundamental rule of law principles. They were doing this before the pandemic, but have increasingly been defying EU law, refusing to comply with rulings of the European Court of Justice, and claiming that national law is superior to EU law, which is, attacking the very pillars of the EU legal order. In Poland, the government is systematically persecuting national judges for sending references to the European courts. In Hungary, the government has started making similar threats. Courts in other member states have then started to refuse arrest warrant requests from judges in those countries, questioning whether suspects can even get a fair trial. In Hungary, in direct response to the pandemic, Orbán has open-ended emergency powers to deal with it that give him essentially unfettered control of the government, the authority to use military power, blocks on parliament from overriding these emergency decrees, and the ability to cancel elections. The government is also tightly controlling information about the pandemic, leading Hungarian newspapers and TV channels to publish an open letter to the government asking for access to COVID wards in hospitals, and also to let healthcare workers speak to the press, both of which are currently denied. Despite the Commission's alleged close monitoring of the situation, Orbán recently cracked down on the independent media as well by handing over the frequency of one of the last main independent radio stations to a government ally. Linking it back to COVID, the Prime Minister's son-in-law and his business associates recently received billions from a loan program designed to help SMEs affected by COVID. Unfortunately, it's not just the usual suspects in Europe. In Belgium currently, the state has based all of its COVID rules on a royal decree, which essentially gives the king the power to make decrees through the government. As we all know, in a democratic constitutional state, such temporary restrictions of freedom must be established in Parliament or on the basis of clear and uniform criteria laid down by Parliament after the necessary advice has been obtained. So this approach was challenged successfully in court recently with a state order to lift all restrictions based on the decrees. The state has obviously appealed. So that order is currently suspended, but we're waiting to see what happens there. The reaction by the European Commission, the alleged guardian of the European treaties, to all of these deficiencies has been heavily criticised. It has brought infringement proceedings, but these have been largely deemed ineffective. There's also only so much the courts can do in the context of preliminary ruling cases when member states ignore the rulings. Underpinning all of this is the EU's financial response to the crisis, which is a combination of a recovery package and the EU's budget or multi-annual financial framework, which comes to just under €2 trillion. I think, as we all know, regulation was adopted linking any funding through the stimulus package to rule of law criteria in order to protect the union's financial interests from the risk of financial loss in the event of generalized deficiencies as regards the rule of law. It effectively gives the Commission as the executive the power to withhold payments to member states over democratic backsliding. As you can guess, the Hungarian and Polish governments initially vetoed the package, but found a compromise with the German presidency through the negotiation of an interpretive declaration to the regulation, which stated that the Commission will not activate a procedure against any country until the Court of Justice rules on the mechanism. There was some strong debate between institutions as to whether that is actually binding. Commentators argue that ironically the Council's doing so, trying to save the rule of law mechanism linked to the COVID stimulus package, actually results in a violation of the checks and balances of the EU legal order. Where things stand now is that the Parliament has issued a deadline of June 1st to the Commission to adopt guidelines covering that conditionality regulation. The Commission misses this deadline, they'll be brought to court by the Parliament. In the meantime, Poland and Hungary have challenged this conditionality regulation, and a ruling is expected over the summer. So we'll all have to wait and see as to how that plays out.
So that was a really fascinating way in which you connected some of the specific events in Hungary and Poland with this new rule of law mechanism at the EU level, and how challenging it's been to get to this far, but still many steps to go before it actually gets implemented. And in the meantime, lots of money riding on the line that people need, countries need for the COVID relief. So very interesting and dynamic process underway with rule of law at the center of it at the European Union level. So thank you for that overview. Now let's turn from this rather worrisome set of issues that you've all outlined and think about some ways of responses to these problems, solutions, etc. So as we can see from the many inspiring projects that were submitted for the World Justice Challenge, countries and communities are responding in a variety of very constructive ways. Can each of you give us maybe 1, 2, or 3 examples of policies or initiatives that have really inspired you as either short-term, like immediate responses, or as examples of tackling the root causes of the rule of law crisis that we face? Many of these issues, as you pointed out, Murray, preceded the crisis. But it seems there's a new impetus to address those root causes. And maybe we'll go in reverse this time and start with you, Deirdre.
Yeah, sure. I think at the risk of oversimplifying, 2 immediate solutions at a macro level for the EU at least are firstly to use the conditionality regulation discussed, and secondly to restart the 2 ongoing Article 7 procedures against Poland and Hungary, which those procedures can see voting rights removed from EU member states in response to systematic threat to EU values. This is a bit of a sore point within the EU right now, as the Portuguese presidency of the Council, in response to calls, including from the Renew Europe MEPs, maintains that for procedural reasons, there could be no Article 7 hearings during the pandemic, as they would be required to take place via video calls. And Article 7 requires the Council to hear the member state in question, which is quite a literal interpretation by the presidency. Obviously with COVID, the Council is not meeting physically, and instead informal video conferences are organised. And for the purposes of Article 7, those do not count as formal Council meetings according to the presidency. This seems a bit like a transparent and poor excuse for inaction, as the Court of Justice itself can allow parties to attend hearings by video conference. Long term, I think what would see a bigger impact is moving away from unanimous decision making in the EU's Article 7 procedure. As it stands, Poland and Hungary are kind of engaged in a pact of mutual protection or mutual self-destruction and blocking any Article 7 decision. And then finally, I think the biggest impact that we could have right now is civil society actors just continuing to do what they're doing during the pandemic. They're crucial to the response to the worsening challenges of rule of law issues. They've been calling for the rule of law dialogues within the council to be made public, which I think is a great idea. And that would go a long way towards ensuring accountability and transparency as governments unwind emergency powers.
Very good. So need to implement this new mechanism and make sure civil society is very actively involved and engaged in going forward. Thank you, Deirdre. Saskia, what do you see as The Hague's response at the local level that you're encouraged by?
Yes, I just talked about this research on the access to justice in The Hague, and that showed that there is a need for a more, I must say, a more holistic approach or aftercare. And we have been speaking, and that is what we're doing right now, with many legal care providers. And it became clear that there are many initiatives to help people with legal issues. But most of them focus on providing information and advice, but really solving the problem and finding a sustainable solution for the problems, that seems harder. So we have to focus on that. We do that by having this discussion with legal care providers, because a lot of the initiative has to be on that way, but maybe there are other solutions, because people are not really helped by having the response on, okay, we see your problem, but it has to be solved, and it has to be thoroughly solved. And we have to find a better way on doing this. I hope there will be a very good inspiration and new ideas from this this meeting. For instance, we can find something on that. But there has to be a lot of things to do. We are in the stadium of studying on that now at the moment, finding solutions together with Hill. And I think when we find them, it's not only a Hague issue, it's an issue for a lot of cities in Europe, in the Netherlands, but maybe all over the world, maybe in a different form, because situations, organizations are different in every country, but the systems behind it are, I think, more or less the same. So we're still working, it's work in progress, but we're getting further. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Saskia. Murray, I'll give you the floor as a kind of wrap up on this question.
Thanks very much indeed, Ted. Yeah, as you say, of course, every crisis is also an opportunity. Even a global pandemic presents opportunities for the rule of law. So just to pick out a few for me, the first one, the leveraging of digital technology has been quite extraordinary in many ways to promote access to justice and good lawmaking and Parliament's ability to hold executives to account. There are lots of examples of really good practice emerging where trends have been accelerated. But again, that needs to be done with great sensitivity to the real danger of deepening the digital divide that already exists. So lots of opportunities there, but we must proceed with caution. Secondly, I think there's a new recognition of the interdependence and indivisibility of human rights. I think the pandemic has revealed a much stronger consensus than we thought previously existed about the importance of the state actually taking action to protect the economic security of people, families, businesses. And one thing I'd like to point to as an example of that recognition is a recent report of the Scottish National Task Force on Human Rights Leadership, which was set up by the Scottish Government, which recommends very far-reaching changes to Scotland's legal framework for human rights protection in order to enable it to build back better after COVID, recognising the importance of, in particular, social, economic and cultural rights, having legal protection in a domestic legal framework. Better articulation of governance standards, I think, is one consequence which we're beginning to see. The Venice Commission has put together a very useful compilation of standards on emergencies, pulling together the standards that prevail in Europe governing emergencies. And that hopefully will be a stepping stone to more specific standards, which we now need to work on spelling out in relation to public health emergencies that we're likely to be living with for some time. And finally, I don't think it's overambitious to say multilateralism seems to be back. states and governments, as a result of the global pandemic, realized that international cooperation and multilateral frameworks are necessary to defeat the virus. We saw a recent joint announcement by the UK, France, and Germany about the need for a new international treaty to deal with future pandemics, with the simple insight, nobody is safe until everyone is safe. And I hope very much that we'll see some progress on that at the G7 summit when it happens in the UK later this year, and that we'll also see that manifest in actually really universal access to vaccines pretty soon. Thanks, Ted.
Yeah, thank you, Murray. These are really good examples. I like that we've touched, the local, the national, and the international global level. So there's a lot of important good work going on. And I should also mention that here in the United States, we've been talking mostly about Europe in this conversation so far, but there's a tremendous amount of work going on in the United States. Both, of course, the impact has been very grave, very high rates of infection and mortality, but also a huge response both from the federal government and more locally, and trying to address some of these root causes. The Black Lives Matters movement in the midst of the pandemic has joined up a lot of these issues, where there's this long-standing, persistent problem of racial inequality in our society that is getting a much deeper look than it did prior to the pandemic. And I think the disparate impact on minorities in the United States of COVID-19 is yet further kind of impetus for addressing some of those root causes. And as we've done these other regional showcases, what we're finding is that these are very common problems across the globe, and that it really does call for a unified effort among all of us to hold hands and learn from each other and move forward in a coherent way. And we really appreciate all three of you taking the time to join us for this conversation. And we look forward to continuing to work with you. And I'm now gonna say thank you, and we're gonna move to the next stage of our program, which is our presentation of our 8 finalists. And we have them queued up and ready to go, I hope. And with the magic of technology, we're going to start with Miklos Ligeti, Head of Legal Affairs at Transparency International Hungary, who's going to talk about a civil campaign to end abuse of government powers. We just heard a bit from Deirdre about what's going on in Hungary, so we're very interested in hearing what you have to say. Go ahead, Miklos.
Thank you very much, but sorry, I lost my presentation to share. This is really unpleasant.
That's okay. No worries. We could either come back to you, or if Killian is able to get it.
The thing is that it's before me, but somehow it does not show itself on the share screen. Okay, I think I'm fine.
I will share your presentation for you, okay? Go ahead.
It's okay, even though I changed the last slide, but I will use that. Okay, I'm fine then. Thank you very much. So can I move my presentation now? No, it's only you that you can move the presentation. Please take the first slide on my part.
Go ahead.
I'd like to, but I don't have my first slide, sorry. Okay, thank you. So Transparency International Hungary is a humble but very determined civil society group of anti-corruption. And what Deirdre said is just like if I have said that, it's our experience that the Hungarian government used the opportunity offered by the COVID-19 pandemic to basically tighten its grip on power and to clamp down on remaining freedoms. This was not unprecedented. Hungary is a country with emerging authoritarian tendencies. And one of the signs of that was the hindering of access to information by refined techniques like tripling the response time limit for government agencies to service freedom of information requests. All this was basically aiming to implement a master plan to unaccountably pocket as much public money as possible. My next slide, please. Our response to this growing challenge was to give an even more targeted use of freedom of information tools by civil society organs. We keep on challenging these regulations and techniques before law courts. We aim to unveil government malpractice and the way government is pocketing and rechanneling large sums, substantial amounts of public assets. We do an outreach campaign to people to sensitize them and educate them about the wrongdoing that is taking place in the country. And we do our best to make it as hard for the government as possible to get away with wrongdoing, to not let corruption remain unsanctioned. My next slide, please. And this is the last one, our impact. We believe that this was going to have an impact only on the longer scale, in the longer term, but basically we introduced 5 new freedom of information requests. We are an organization with many freedom of information and access to court cases. But to test what remained from the freedom of information framework in the country, we tried to make 5 new cases. And we are in courtroom already. So we successfully took the first step to circumvent government hurdles. We are in courtroom now. We have a constitutional complaint to the highest judicial forum of the country to have a constitutional review of the government legislation. And we have good prospects for winning these cases in court. And when we are coming back to the question, I will have the final slide of my presentation. Thank you so much.
Very good. I'm glad we got the slides to work. Thank you very much, Miklos. It's a really important project. We'll now move on to the second on our list, Andrea Nelson Mauro. He's a project manager and data journalist with Appatipop from ondata.it in Italy. Go ahead, Andrea.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you, everyone. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. I am Andrea. I'm talking on behalf of Ondata. For 6 years, Ondata has been working hard to make public data open and accessible for everyone, even before the pandemic forced us all home. We are one of the first non-profit teams that promote open data in Italy, and we help civil society organizations without technical skills through our platforms and support. We really believe that open data can allow citizens to improve processes and business in a more transparent society. When we talk about open data, we think about a raw material for companies, journalists, advocates, and citizens at large. That's why we want to open up public data, in particular about public procurement. Now, COVID-19 pandemic forced Italian government to facilitate the process of public procurement to cope with the emergency, but this entails forthcoming issues in terms of transparency and competitiveness. So this is the problem that you can see in the screen as summarized in the screen now. Pandemic increased the gap between citizens and institutions in Italy because institutions are not fully transparent through public data on the management of the pandemic and public expenditure. So we don't know at the moment how are the criteria to close one region, to adopt some measures of lockdowns or very lockdowns. On the other hand, citizens distrust government. So we have every day riots, or some not so riots, but protesters in different cities. So for instance, yesterday we had protests by restaurant managers in Rome. Citizens distrust sorry?
Go ahead.
Citizens distrust government decisions because they have not access to the criteria of the data. Moreover, 200 billion euro will be spent in the next 5 years for public projects aimed at restarting the solution. The solution that we can propose you is to bridging this gap between citizen and government, pushing institutions to open up data and about COVID-19 and recovery plan, gathering citizens that join us in a public campaign with 50,000 signatures to ask for open data, and laying the ground to create a public and participatory process of monitoring this data through our platform, Appalti-Pop, that will expose data about public procurement related to the pandemic. The impact of the project is to reduce this gap between citizens and public institutions by empowering a wide civil monitoring process about this data. We strongly believe that monitoring citizens will become new mediators with their skills, with their activities to assess government decisions and to publicly guarantee their implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Two very interesting projects. We're focusing on here in particular on anti-corruption and open government and use of technology and the law, freedom of information laws. Let's turn to our next finalist, Akbar Farouk, who is the CEO of Global Justice Solutions in the United States, and he's going to tell us about Ability to Pay project. Go ahead. You're on mute. Farouk, you're on mute, yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you, Ted. The problem we're working on has to do with access to justice, more importantly, what we call it, the debtor's prison phenomena, which has impacted millions of people, not just in the United States, but across the globe. There's a big disparity in our criminal justice system when it comes to convictions and someone's ability to pay their court-obligated legal financial fines and fees, or bail, if you will. Unfortunately, our criminal justice system has criminalized those who could not afford their bail amount or court fines and fees with wage garnishments, driver's license suspensions, or even jail term, leading to displaced families, lost jobs, also putting them to continued cycle of poverty and even mass incarceration, not to mention the violation of human rights with excessive fines, which we have seen in certain states. Today, there are over 2 million people who are behind bars, and over 70% of them held in jails are yet to be convicted, and they are just there because they couldn't afford bail. And the whole problem has been further exacerbated with the COVID-19 pandemic, where we have seen courts, not just in the United States, but across the world, have either shut down temporarily the courts and even reduced the operations for the limiting access to justice for the defendants. And just in the United States, nearly 13% of the COVID-19 infections have been attributed to mass incarceration, which is a pretty staggering number there. So the solution we have put together is called Ability to Pay, which allows defendant to submit an electronic petition to a judge and request alternatives to their court-obligated fines and fees. The tool also uses an algorithm which automatically recommends to a judge if the defendant qualifies for a reduction of fines and fees, or a payment plan, or even community service in lieu of the fines and fees there, or even extension of payment plan based on the information provided. A judge, on the other hand, can use the information to accept the recommendation from the tool or make modifications and adjudicate the petition real time. A defendant doesn't even have to come to the courthouse, and they can get the court order electronically. As for the impact, the project has been implemented in 5 pilot counties in California as part of a grant by the Judicial Council and also the Department of Justice Price of Justice grant. And the project has been implemented in over 16,000 petitions since we went live in 2019, and more than 15,000 have been granted reduction of fines. And the solution has been implemented statewide in California to the rest of the 58 counties. And using the solution, defendants are able to safely submit the petitions and in real time get their alternative sanctions to the court fines and fees, leading to reduced incarceration rates and improved access to justice, and of course, reducing the COVID spread and upholding human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Akbar. Right on time, and really striking that statistic about over 70% of inmates in local jails have not been convicted of a crime. You know, this issue of pretrial detention is huge all over the world, and here in the United States.
Absolutely.
We're going to move on now to Barbara Hinterman, who is the Director General of Terre de Homme Foundation, based in Switzerland, but doing work around the world. But because they are based in Europe, we included them in this group. and she's going to tell us about accelerating release of children in detention. Go ahead, Mark.
Yes. I get some assistance on my PowerPoint from one of your team members.
There we go.
Yes, please, next slide. I was suffocated inside the prison more than ever. I could not even talk to the others. My world inside was already dull, but when the COVID-19 arrived, it turned total darkness. I was left completely alone. I still cannot believe that they managed to get me out of there. So what do these words of a 13-year-old boy from Afghanistan tell us? Children in detention do not suffer necessarily from direct consequences of COVID, but COVID challenges the upholding of the rights of children in justice system. So I would like to highlight four main problems. COVID poses significant risks to the mental and physical health of children in detention. COVID places significant stress and trauma from isolation and abandonment because they lack support and comfort from families and because their detention is prolonged due to reduced court operations and quarantine restrictions. COVID-19 has placed extreme strains on existing detention centers and poses risks of system failure and inadequate levels of care and attention due to limited staff. And last but not least, deplorable living conditions of detention increases the overall risk of the community to the community of spreading COVID due to overcrowding, poor health, water and sanitation facilities. Next slide, please. So what did we propose as a solution? We launched a global advocacy campaign prioritizing the release of children from detention during COVID. Deprivation of children's liberty should be a measure of last resort and for the shortest appropriate period of time. The separation of children from their parents should be discouraged as they are supposed to grow within the family environment. Now, our concrete actions were, we requested the urgent release of children from detention in the short term while reinforcing practices to enable justice actors to implement non-custodial measures in the longer term alongside empowering children to claim their rights. Secondly, we adopted our sustainable approach to justice reform and combined systems strengthening the direct provision of services to children. We advocated for the release of children and supported the release of children from detention and their reintegration into the community. We improved the prison health care and hygiene facilities and services through supply of products and training of staff. We produced operational guidelines for various stakeholders on working with and for children in contact with the justice system during pandemic and other crises. Third slide, please. Here are just some results. The list is much longer. We got the release of more than 350 children. We supplied health and hygiene products to 1,500 children in detention in Afghanistan and trained staff in Guinea how to adequately care for sick child inmates. We also provided material to 3,500 children and 500 frontline staff in Myanmar. Our actions also boosted child justice reform processes across different regions. So it's really a global advocacy campaign that had indeed a real impact on the lives of children. It was fed from the local level and done for impacting at the local level. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Barbara. That, it's such a focus on a vulnerable population like children in prison. It's really important work. We're now going to turn to Didžits Melkis, the communications manager with Foundation for Public Participation in Latvia, who's going to tell us about their work on civic digital participation and legislation during the crisis. Go ahead, Didžits.
Right. Thank you so much. My name is Didžits. Hello from Latvia. And I will lead you through our project, which in plain English sounds like this. Where is my voice? Well, basically, during the crisis, the problem here is that the decision-making power has shifted from parliament to government. And in the government, civic society has, well, let's be honest, close to no say, especially those COVID-19 regulations. And here come we as a civic participation platform, My Voice, and we restore this lost balance and give voice to people in those COVID-19 regulations. Last year, 6 to even 7 civic legislative initiatives via our platform have been reviewed by the Parliament in a wide range of issues. And they have been really successful, as you will see later on. Additionally, what we are doing with this, we are pushing the boundaries, meaning that those collective submissions by citizens, they are legislated only on the parliamentary level. And what we are doing the last year and this year, so we are pushing the boundaries to include civic participation also on those COVID-19 regulations which take place in the government, and which is very important while they are still in making. So making real impact, real voice to be heard. As a result of our work, last year, 2 national scale laws have been implemented. And one of them is regarding the cancellation of centralized school exams for the 9th graders. And the second one, actually, that's quite unique. Actually, it was done by the private sector, but they really heeded that civic voice about credit holidays during the pandemic. It's really remarkable. 5 more have been reviewed, discussed, and declined. Well, we say it's still success because they have been heard and they have been discussed on the highest possible political level. So, and it has scalability, obviously, as we work already, 10 years. And this year, 6 more those COVID-themed initiatives have been submitted to the Parliament and the government, and they are in the review process. So we're looking forward to new success stories for civic participation in Latvia. And that's all, folks, for now. Thank you.
Wonderful, Didzis, thank you. It's a particularly important example of accountable governance and how citizens are being heard and making sure that their voices are brought not only to Parliament, but as you well described, to the executive government as well. Thank you. We're now going to turn to Inga Pagava, a development and fundraising specialist with the Public Verdict Foundation in Russia, who's going to tell us about a project called Gray Zone that focuses on prisons in Russia. Go ahead, Inga. You're on mute. Look on the bottom, maybe the bottom left, if you bring your cursor down to the bottom.
Okay, right now. And also I want to open up the presentation and it doesn't open up.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, can you see it? No. Okay, I'll do it like this. Yes, okay, sorry. So for correctional colonies and detention centers, the pandemic meant increased health and life risks within not only very close, but also very crowded institutions. And we at the Public Verdict Foundation started to receive alarming messages already in March 2020, urgent requests for help from relatives and convicts from different locations. And the situation began to escalate quite quickly. Tests were not done, patients were not isolated, treatment was not appropriate, and we heard of sporadic death cases from uncertain causes, and they were carefully concealed, and no information was provided. So prisoners' access to legal aid was restricted, lawyers were no longer allowed to see prisoners, and institutions were simply quarantined. Any visitations were forbidden. Contact with relatives was restricted in every possible way, while contact with employees of colonies who went out every day and came back led their usual way of life on the outside, then they returned to the correctional colonies to work, was maintained. So how was the problem dealt with? We created and published a digital map that marked all colonies with confirmed cases of COVID and coupled the map with follow-up legal aid. Technically, the project registered all reports received and made them public after validity check, as well as to confirm real data. Sometimes official information from a penitentiary service and prison medical department from one and the same region was inconsistent. With the permission of convicts and their relatives, our team of lawyers and barristers filed personalized inquiries to prison administration, medical units, and penitentiary services at the regional level. We demanded information, confirmation, and immediate action. And those inquiries had legal power and set the gears in motion. The map registered anonymous calls as well, and that was extra valuable as disclosure meant for convicts taking personal risks. And the map resonated so strongly that the Federal Penitentiary Service and medical departments began to report data and respond to external requests, including requests from relatives and public organizations. Medical care began to be provided. Convicts with symptoms were isolated, resettled, special equipped boxes, and even cells appeared. Greater publicity and public response to the gray zone resulted in opening access to lawyers, both at pre-trial detention and at detention centers and colonies. And short-term visitations were allowed with relatives. And we saw that civil oversight proved to have effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Inga. I mean, great example of civil society taking the lead and holding, in this case, prison systems accountable during the crisis. We will now move on to two more projects. We're next going to call on Hilda Perez, who's a collaborator for communications with the Guatemalan Women's Association based in Spain. And she's going to tell us about the refugee and immigrant women expelled from the right zone during COVID. Go ahead, Hilda.
Thank you very much. So about the problem, I want to say that in Spain, currently more than 6,100 migrants and refugees cannot exercise their right to a legal identity because of the state's discriminatory policies against them. And the denial of this right also implies the curtail of basic rights connected to legal identity, such as the right to work or healthcare, and opens up the possibility that foreigners might be locked up in a detention center and expelled from the country. This progressive hardening of government anti-immigration policies has been a constant in recent years, but it has worsened during the pandemic. And the consequences is that it has increased in the migrant and refugee population in irregular administrative situation. They haven't been able to renew their residence or work permits and have been affected also by the policy of massive denials of asylum applications. At the same time, the state has denied all emergency protection to this already vulnerable population by excluding any person who has not regularized from any special aid approved to ease the effects of the pandemic. Migrant and refugee women are the main affected by this curtail of rights, and therefore their situation of greater vulnerability and precariousness has intensified with the pandemic, despite the fact that they have assumed most of the essential jobs during the state of alarm, like harvesting in crop fields, caregiving for the elderly, or domestic or cleaning services. They have seen themselves somehow in unworthy and even exploitative conditions, and the administration has left them sideways, expelled from the right zone. So how do we tackle this problem? Well, basically, we are going to tackle this problem through taking action mainly by legal and judicial mechanisms, and also an outreach work with media outlets, and proving them that closing the doors of the state administration targeting migrants and refugees is a violation of the right to equality and non-discrimination, which is upheld both by the Spanish Constitution itself and the international law. We are clear that we must act in several areas, combining strategic litigation with advocacy institutions and with denounce and awareness campaigns in the media outlets. Our proposal is that we reinforce this action with a diagnostic report to know in-depth the dimension of the problem and to identify specific cases, the continuity of strategic litigation actions that we have already underway, and the development of a strong campaign of complaint and communication through the media. And about the impact that it has had, AMG succeeded in getting the Ombudsman to recommend that the government abandon restrictive practice of forcing refugees to renounce their asylum application while applying for other residence through other means, which they're entitled by law. Also, a High Court in Madrid has agreed with AMG by legally denouncing that non-access to the administration is discrimination. And we're already generating an opinion on the Spanish mass media agenda. This is one of our permanent activities. Much remains to be done, but we see that these successes show great potential of growth that this project has at all levels. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Hilda. Interesting to hear the combination of things that you've done, including not only strategic litigation, but working with the media to raise awareness of the problem. Thank you. We're now going to move to our final project presentation. Sean Moulton, Senior Policy Analyst with the Project on Government Oversight in the United States, and he's going to talk to us about using data to track relief funds and how they've helped people deal with the economic crisis. Go ahead, Sean.
Thank you. As Murray said in his opening statement, when you spend large amounts of money very quickly, you risk higher levels of waste, fraud. You risk funding the most well-connected communities rather than the communities most in need. And that's where our project tried to tackle. In the United States, Congress has already approved more than $5 trillion for COVID relief efforts. And that's more than the entire 2019 GDP for the country of Japan, which had the third highest GDP that year. And with such unprecedented spending, we really believe we need unprecedented transparency to make sure the money is spent wisely and equitably and responsibly. Unfortunately, that's really not what we were seeing from the government. And so we decided that we would just roll up our sleeves and try and do it ourselves. And we built a COVID-19 spending tracker that tries to be the most comprehensive and detailed view into US federal spending around the pandemic. It brings data into one space. Right now, 15 million transactions covering $1.6 trillion. And that's going up regularly as we update. And the site features overview tools such as interactive maps that allow the public to look at spending patterns and totals by location at the state level, or zooming into their county or their zip code. It also brings in other data such as demographic data's total population, minority population percentage, and unemployment numbers to give people the ability to review the spending with some context, allow them to start asking the tougher questions about the spending choices we've made and whether or not the money really reached where it was most needed. And we've already seen let me try and get us to our next slide. We've already seen this be very effective as a tool. We've found companies getting assistance that then turned around and made big political contributions. We have found banks that are doing too little oversight on their loans, giving money out to companies that didn't really exist. We found questions about equity, where the counties with the highest percentage of minority populations got below the county average in COVID relief funds. And so we're working to improve it and expand it because we think this really is, could be a template for the future of government spending and holding it accountable, both at the federal level in the United States, but also at the state level or in other countries. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sean. I mean, it's a remarkable amount of data that you've collected and put together in an accessible way for people to understand. We're going to do a quick round, what we call a lightning round of 1-minute responses from each of our finalists. And the key question I'd like you to answer is, what is the big takeaway that you want to share with this audience? What is the main lesson you learned in the process of doing these particular projects? Of course, in the midst of a public health crisis. So we're going to go back and start at the top and go to Hungary. Miklos from Transparency International.
Yes, thank you very much. So I could say so many lessons learned and takeaways, but maybe the most important for us is that we can do it. Even though the government in Hungary is huge compared to our size and tools and our infrastructure, and the government of Hungary compared to us has inexhaustible resources and can change the rules of the game even before the game is over. But with wisely using civil society tools, with wisely reaching out to new audiences, engaging the people, and having good quality low products, turning to low courts, making good quality complaints and writs, we can overcome these hurdles and hardships, and we can level the playing field, which is maybe the biggest takeaway and biggest lesson we learned from this project, that we are not alone and we are not incapable. We are able-minded and able-bodied to take this fight. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much. We're going to turn now to Andrea. What was your big takeaway lesson learned from this project?
Oh, thank you, Ted. And yes, just a few words on that. We think, taking it into account our expertise so far, and bringing citizens to sign our campaigns, to participate in our project, we think that data can be the link between citizens and governments, and we think that competencies of citizens can be an instrument, an essential instrument to assess what the government is doing. So creating a process that can link data, competence of citizens, and what the government is doing could be a kind of effective cycle to implement a way for open government. So that's it. Thank you.
Great. Data is the bridge to citizens and government. Perfect. Akbar, ability to pay project, Global Justice Solutions.
Yeah, for us, the key takeaway is that it can help level the playing field for people who come into contact with the justice system, and help alleviate the debtor's prison phenomena. And the key learning we had was punishing people for not being able to pay their fines and fees or bail amount does not promote justice. It only perpetuates a cycle of poverty. And the punishment becomes about the person's economic status versus their action, for instance, a traffic violation. Affording people solutions that they can comply with allows for justice to be served while avoiding excessive punishments for minor infractions. I would like to quote Santa Clara Superior Court's presiding judge, Deborah Ryan. No one should have to decide between paying for groceries or rent and paying a traffic fine. This tool provides traffic code defendants with alternatives and is another way in which the Superior Court is working to bring justice and equity to the people of Santa Clara County, and this is scalable to other states and across the globe. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for that, Akbar. Barbara, can you share with us the main lesson learned from your project?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think one takeaway, well, there is many, but one major one is, if it is possible to get the release of the children during the pandemic, then there should be absolutely no obstacle to get the release of children during so-called normal times. So we continue to advocate for that, with various stakeholders working around that. There is various tools that we could use, the penal mediation, to think about alternative to detention. The second one is the lessons learned. technology becomes even more important in times of COVID for children in prison. First of all, to connect with the families by phone, by computer, whatever. So we work on that, but also to provide, to be capable and have procedural safeguards for children in e-courts. So Terre des Hommes will really focus on that in the next future.
Very good. So leveraging the crisis to set new precedents, and then the use of technology, which we're hearing from many projects. Thank you. Dizits from Latvia, tell us your main takeaway.
Yes, sure. I kind of, I'm in the same shoes and on the same page with the colleagues here previously, but well, our way of doing things, our modus operandi is that we are civic entrepreneurs. It's like policy entrepreneurs, but on the civic area. And so basically you have to know the right doors you're pushing on, and then wait for the so-called window of opportunity. Wait for, not passively, but persistently. Wait and push on it, it will open. This is what we learned, and have, options available, etc. But be persistent, be focused. That's it. Yeah, it works.
Excellent. I think we can all take that to heart in so many ways. Inga from Russia from the Public Verdict Foundation, please go ahead.
Maybe I won't be saying very novel things, but we just proved certain things that first of all, like any civil action is a way of overcoming a fear. We, through the process of when we created the map, we were not sure that it will work. But convicts who were already taking risks by informing us, and their relatives, and as well as journalists, their action put together showed that and brought the effect, right? We got the penitentiary service talking to us and revealing information. So it was a great sensation when we understood that there's no place for fear. And also we learned that teamwork, because there's like about 10 organizations and about 10 people involved in maintaining the map, was a great feeling. Like it gave us a great feeling.
Yep, that's very encouraging. Taking the initiative to overcome the fear and proving that civil society can actually be a catalyst for really important change. Thank you. Hilda Perez from Spain, Migrants Rights, go ahead. Take the big takeaway. You're on mute.
Sorry, we have at least, I was saying that we have at least 3 of them and that I would like to share. And the first one is novelty. We're pioneers in considering non-access to the administration and legal identity as both a violation of fundamental rights and also a discrimination, and not just a mere administrative matter. The second one is that we propose an intertwined action with strategic litigation, advocacy with the government, and also these strong communication campaigns that we do know that work and make a difference. And also some work in social media. We have experience mobilizing very successful campaigns. Like, for example, I invite you to follow up the hashtag Yo Te Creo, which we promote from AMG. We launched it back in 2016 in favor of victims of sexual violence. And in the Spanish-speaking countries, it has hundreds of millions of mentions. This means that there are also a lot of people supporting. And last but not least, the sustainability of the project, which is based on AMG owns autonomy. We have been working with our own resources for as long as 12 years. And in addition, we know firsthand the problems of our community, since we as refugee and immigrants are part of, complete part of the association, and we speak for ourselves with our own voice. So that's a strong strength.
Yes, very good. Thank you so much. Having those most affected leading the charge is really important takeaway there. Sean, you have the final word on this round. What's the big takeaway from Pogo's work on using data on relief funds?
Yeah, I mean, I think following the money is always a good strategy for holding governments accountable. And while, as I said in my presentation, when you're spending a lot of money very fast, you need extra accountability. I think our big takeaway from this is that there are things we're asking now that we should continue to ask even after this pandemic goes away. People deserve to be able to know whether or not the government's money is being spent equitably, whether it's fairly reaching communities most in need. How many jobs is it supporting? It doesn't matter if it's a government contract or a grant. These are fundamental questions that we have the right to know, but also I think if we did know, we might be able to then change how it is we're spending money. And that money has a tremendous impact day in and day out, whether there's a pandemic or not.
Excellent. Follow the money and know where it's going and how it's being spent. Well, thank you all of our finalists today for their excellent presentations. Now is your chance to talk to them directly in our breakout rooms, and you'll get a chance to pop up on the screen right here. Choose one of these and take a quick look at these. We have facilitators in each room. And on the list, if you scroll down, I believe it's down, you'll come to the rooms themselves. So you'll see a bunch of names and then you'll come to room 1, Hungary, etc. So go ahead and join whichever project you would like to speak to. You'll have 10 minutes for the first round, and then you'll get a chance to circulate and go to another room. And we'll do this 3 times, and then we'll just do a final wrap up back in the main room. So that's how the process works. And if you're not sure, we might just assign you to one of these. But thank you all for picking rooms to go into. And we'll look forward to circling back after this round in the breakout rooms. All right, well, welcome back everyone. And I hope you found that a rewarding experience. And certainly the rooms I went to were quite interesting. And thanks for coming back. Really just want a quick wrap up here. And first of all, thank everyone for their participation in the event, starting of course with our sponsors, the Bingham Centre for Rule of Law, the Municipality of The Hague, also Wilson Sonsini law firm, and our partners there in the Brussels office for all their work. And of course, all of you project finalists. I know a lot of work went into these presentations, and all those who joined in to learn more about it. There is even more information. If you didn't get around to one of the breakout rooms, you can go to the website, WJP's website, and look for the World Justice Challenge page, and you'll see more information on each of the 30 finalist projects. And then we encourage you to go join the community forum, pose more questions, and request a ballot so that you can vote in time for the selection of the popular vote winner. So the deadline for that vote is April 30th, Friday, April 30th, and the voting starts tomorrow. Finally, just a reminder that on May 26th, we'll announce the winners, the 6 winners, the 5 from the judges and the 1 popular vote winner. So you'll all be receiving an invitation to that event, and we hope you'll spread the word and get as many people to join us and celebrate that choice and those awards. With that, of course, a final thank you to the incredible staff, the teamwork that went into this, Killian and Joel and all of the members of the engagement team and others who have been facilitating the breakout rooms and all the other things that happen behind the scenes. We could not do it without them, and a special shout out to all of them. So thank you. Hope to see you around Zoomland sometime soon. Signing off. Thank you.